All right, thank you and welcome back. If you're joining Herman in the workshop room to hear about developing on Safe Core Protocol, that's the side room over there on my left. And without further ado, I'll give it up to Philippe Schommers to hear about the future of Gnosis Chain. Take it away.
Thank you. Hey, yeah, so let's talk about what's next for Gnosis Chain. Okay, it's a bit different than the title initially suggested. It's not really a long-term future, but more so what's going to happen in the next coming months or so, maybe next year. So yeah, we're going to be talking about what Gnosis Chain actually is right now, because, well, I feel like some people don't really know about it too much. Then about Dencun, which is the upcoming hard fork for Ethereum and thus for Gnosis Chain as well. And then 2 research projects, which are turning Gnosis into a layer 2 and the Shadowized Beacon Chain. So what's Gnosis Chain? Well, basically it's a layer 1 blockchain that is based on Ethereum. So it's quite the same, actually. So we also have a beacon chain. We have the same clients, so Nimbus, Aragon, Nethermind, Prism, whatever, all basically the same. We don't have Geth, but it's coming soon. Well, actually, we also don't have Prism, but it's also coming soon. And we go through the same hard forks. And of course, we're also super focused on decentralization. So we have 150,000 validators right now, compared to the 780 from Ethereum, but still, we're getting there. And it's one of the most decentralized chains. We also have a few differences with Ethereum, from Ethereum, which are that we were initially a proof of authority chain, so not proof of work. So it was based on Aura and SpaceDAO. And the merge was a bit different for us than for Ethereum, but we're working towards becoming more identical to Ethereum so that we can stay up to date. We also use GNO as a staking token, which is an ERC20 token. And our base token is actually XDAI, so it's a stablecoin, which also has interesting properties. We have 5-second block times, which is 2.4 times faster than Ethereum, and 16-slot epochs, which means our finality is 4.8 times faster than Ethereum. So this is the hard fork timeline. So as you can see, we started the beacon chain 1 year after Ethereum, and then went to the merge December of last year, and did Chapella on the 1st of August of this year, so it's quite recent. And this happened 4 months after Ethereum. And our objective, so as you can see, is, we are constantly getting closer to, becoming as fast as Ethereum for hard forks, basically. So the beacon chain was 1 year later, the merge was 9 months later, Chapella was 4 months after Ethereum, and our objective is to become way closer to Ethereum. So hopefully Dencun will happen around the same time as Ethereum. So there's no date for this yet, but probably late 2023. And then also Shadowized Beacon Chain will come after that. So let's talk about Dencun. So that's the upcoming hard fork. And there's 5 EIPs for Dencun. I'm not going to go too much into details, but basically the one we're interested in is 4844 mostly, which is called shard blob transactions, also known as proto-dank sharding. So as a bit of context, proto-dank sharding, or EIP 4844, sorry, will bring cheaper on-chain data. So the data will go from 3 gas per byte to 16 gas, other way around. No, yeah, right, from 3 gas per byte from 16 gas per byte. But the data will not be accessible to the EVM, meaning that contracts cannot interact with it. And that data will also be ephemeral, so it will be deleted or can be deleted after 18 days, which is also why it's cheaper, because we don't have to store it forever. And this all results in cheaper and more scalable L2s, because they heavily rely on call data. So there's a few issues with 4844 for Gnosis specifically. First, there's hardware requirements. So as Gnosis has faster block times, we also have more blobs per a given time frame, which means more hardware requirements and bandwidth requirements as well. So there's 2 solutions to this. The first one being to reduce the target and max blob gas per block. So basically having less blobs than Ethereum per block. But in total, we can still have the same because we have faster blocks. The second solution would be to require better hardware and networking, but that, of course, creates some centralization because only some people will be able to afford it, and we really don't want that. The second issue, which is also kind of linked to the hardware requirements, is the propagation times, which is linked to bandwidth. So basically, those blobs will increase the total size of blocks. It's not really blocks, but the total data that has to be transferred by 40%, which is a lot. And on Gnosis Chain, you actually only have 1.66 seconds to build and propagate an entire block through the entire network. That comes from the fact that on Ethereum, it's basically the same, but you have 1/3 to build and propagate the block, 1/3 for attestations, and 1/3 for aggregations. So in Ethereum, it's 4 seconds for each. On Gnosis Chain, as we only have 5-second blocks, it's 1.66 seconds for each. So it's really not that much. And this might actually already be an issue right now on Gnosis Chain, which we are not really running into because the blocks are not really that full. But if they were full, maybe we already would have issues with propagation times. So right now we're running a big block experiment to basically simulate bigger blocks and see if the chain keeps up and if participations don't drop. So there's also 3 solutions for this issue. The first one would be to increase the time allocation for building a block and propagating it. And actually, there's a pull request open on the consensus specs repo for this, which, yeah, it would be nice if that came to pass. So the idea would be then, for example, to have 3 seconds for block building and propagation, and then 1 second for aggregations, and 1 second for attestations, or the way around. But yeah, so that's a PR on the Gnosis specs, the Ethereum specs. So yeah, it's not done yet. We might not be able to implement that in time. The second solution, which is quite similar to the previous one, is to have smaller blobs. And the third one would be to substantially improve block propagation performance, which Nimbus has actually done a fantastic job on, but we might be hitting the limits of what's still possible to do. And there's a third issue. Well, there's a bunch of other issues, but let's say those are the 3 most important ones. So on Gnosis Chain, we have 2 main execution layer clients, which are Nethermind and Aragon. And Nethermind doesn't support ETH68. So that's a communication protocol used between nodes. And basically, EIP 4844 really prefers to have that because it has a new protocol that just says, OK, I have a block that is this size, or I have a blob that is this size, and then other nodes can choose if they want to download it or not. And that's a lot more efficient than the previous protocols, and yeah. Sadly, Nethermind still has to support ETH66 because there is this get node data field. It's not that important, but they rely on it for fasting, and so they can't deprecate ETH66, and so they cannot use ETH67 and ETH68. So the solutions for this are quite obvious, I guess. So either Nethermind updates their codes to not rely on that ETH66 get node data field anymore. For example, by implementing a snapsync server like Geth, for example, and then to enable ETH68, which would be the preferred solution. And the other one would be to just say on ETH66, not 67, slight issue in this error in the slides. But that would be, of course, less efficient because then you have to broadcast the blocks to everyone instead of nodes choosing what they download, basically. Yeah, so let's move on to research and development. So there's 2 things I'm going to talk about. One is to turn Gnosis Chain into a layer 2, which is quite, well, a lot of projects are starting to go this route. It's quite interesting. But I'm just going to give a general idea. So there's, of course, trade-offs between layer 1s and layer 2s. The main pro, I would say, for layer 2s is that you have safer bridges and, I guess, a network that is secured by the layer 1. But then the cons are that you generally have a centralized sequencer that then can choose which transactions and in which order the transactions are being executed, and they can also just censor transactions if they want to, so just not include them in blocks. It's not as easy as that, but I'm not spending too much time on that information. You'll see why later. So ideally, we want to keep a neutral block space while also having the security from a layer 1, for example, Ethereum, so that Gnosis Chain could theoretically continue working even if it stopped working, if that kind of makes sense, by going on the layer 1. And for Gnosis Chain, it might actually be possible. I mean, we're not there yet by any means, but by remaining a layer 1, but adding some layer 2 features on top of that. But yeah, as I mentioned, I'm not going to go too much into details about this because Daplion has an entire talk about this at DappCon on Wednesday. Again, slide issue in the slides. Yeah, it's on Wednesday at 13:55, sorry. And then the second research project is the Shadowized Beacon Chain. So as a bit of context, it all starts from the fact that we kind of need a shielded mempool to avoid MEV, basically, so avoid getting front-run or sandwiched. We also want this to be decentralized. So right now we have flashbots or MEV blocker, but they are centralized. You send them the transactions. It's just a kind of private mempool. So they just don't broadcast this to other nodes or on the providers. And by this way, they can kind of keep it safe. But they also have the data, and they themselves could choose to organize it however they want. And they can also censor you. They can also stop, geo-block you or whatever. So that's not a great solution. And we want it to be censorship resistant. So why do we need censorship resistance? So right now on Ethereum, 90% of the blocks are actually built by 4 builders, which is a lot. And of course, it's way easier to censor 4 entities than the 780,000 validators that are currently active on Ethereum. One example, of course, being the OFAC compliancy, which a lot of builders and validators are now trying to get into. And as a matter of fact, 50% of the blocks on Ethereum right now, roughly, are actually OFAC compliant. So, for example, they censor Tornado Cash transactions and the likes. And also having builders actually gives a lot of competitive advantage to the builders, because they have all the transactions. They can decide in which order they are getting included and whatever. So it's not always great. It's also fairly cheap to censor Ethereum for a very short period of time, for not that much. For example, I don't remember who did this specifically, but it's listed in one of those sources. So they were able to censor Ethereum for 1 block, so for 12 seconds, for only 0.05 ETH, which is not that much. And some applications rely on very fast, getting included in a block quite fast. For example, this is the case for Gnosis Pay, but again, not too many details about this. But yeah, some applications are time sensitive, so this is also an issue, and Shudder also can fix that. So the general idea is that you would have transactions that are actually encrypted, and then you post them on a sequencer contract, and you encrypt those transactions for a specific slot. So they cannot be executed except on that slot. You could also actually encrypt those transactions for a specific validator, because you actually know who's going to propose a block a few epochs prior to when it's actually going to happen. And then a decentralized network of keepers actually creates shards of keys or fractions of keys, and together you create a decryption key with which you can decrypt those transactions, after which the proposer creates a block, and he has to put them at the very beginning of the block and in the order in which they appeared in the sequencer contract. So if I'm the first one to schedule a transaction for slot 100, for example, my transaction will be the first transaction in that block on slot 100. So this solves the second issue I talked before, and then also it's encrypted, so you cannot front-run me because I will be the first one, and even if I wasn't, you don't know what I have in my transaction, so you can't effectively front-run me. And we are building this in a plugin architecture, meaning we don't want a hard fork, and we don't want to change from the Ethereum spec too much, because then it becomes harder for us to basically stay up to date with Ethereum and its own advancements and hard forks. So this is a basic architecture. I'm not going to go too much into details, but yeah, so as I mentioned, so the users encrypt transactions, send it to the sequencer contract, and then the keepers will create a key, a decryption key in a decentralized way. The proposer then proposes a block, and there you go. So for the implementation, right now we're going to build this in a opt-in way. So validators opt into becoming Shudder enabled. We're not going to force everyone to do this at the moment, but at some point we expect this to become mandatory because that's the only way it can really fully work. And becoming a Shudder-enabled validator, I mean, we might require some additional stake for security and slashing purposes. To make it simpler for users, we can also have like a middle point, which again doesn't really work and is centralized and whatever, but where you would have a specific RPC, then you can just connect it to MetaMask or whatever, and the RPC will then encrypt the transactions for you. Again, you have to trust the RPC is centralized. We don't really want that, but it's a good middle step to get adoption. And this is built in collaboration with Shudder and Nethermind. So Shudder is basically doing the specs and parts of the contracts and implementation. And Nethermind is doing the reference client implementation. And the current progress is that we already have the DKG, or more specifically, Shudder has it, because actually they use it already in production on Ethereum to shield the snapshots, the snapshots app on Ethereum. We also have a concrete spec, which you can find on our repo, the specs repo on Gnosis Chain. And the contracts are being worked on by Shudder, and we have a first, like, the peer-to-peer components are being built by Nethermind. Yeah, and so that's it for me. If you want to find out more, there's a few relevant links. Of course, you can also always contact us on Telegram, Discord, whatever. You can also come talk to me, of course. I will be here all day, probably. Yeah, and there you go. Thanks for listening.